Groundhog Day is officially Wednesday, but you're excused if you feel like you're living it as you watch the Trump presidency unfold. He acts, protesters react. Repeat. No Muslim ban. Rallies and marches popped up around the country this weekend after Trump signed executive orders that banned travel from 7 majority Muslim nations for at least 90 days and stopped refugees from Syria's civil war from settling in the U.S. Here's what he said on Friday.
I'm establishing new vetting measures to keep radical Islamic terrorists out of the United States of America. We don't want them here.
Trump has said his action is not discriminating against any particular religion, but both the order and a recent interview with a Christian cable station seem to contradict that claim.
As it relates to persecuted Christians, do you see them as kind of a priority here?
Yes.
You do?
Yes, they've been horribly treated. Do you know, if you were a Christian in Syria, it was impossible, at least very tough to get into the United States. If you were a Muslim, you could come in. But if you were a Christian, it was almost impossible.
And the order itself would help those Christians by prioritizing refugee claims made by individuals under religious-based persecution, provided the religion of the individual is a minority religion in the individual's country of nationality. It's a quote. His order created confusion at airports here and abroad as travelers, many of whom held legitimate papers, were detained and questioned for hours.
It's a little bit humiliating, I should say, to sort of take you out of the line and tell you that you have to go through a different process.
It's just my life has turned into hell in 2 days.
As I'm sure you know, federal judges in Boston and New York temporarily blocked the order, but that didn't stop the outrage, even among some Republicans, that Trump had acted without fully considering the constitutional consequences. Congressman Seth Moulton tweeted to the real Donald Trump that I'm ashamed that you are our president.
He's not keeping America safe at all. He's making things a lot more dangerous. And that's the problem with this executive order. It's not just un-American and unconstitutional, which it is. It flies in the face of our values, but it absolutely is making us less safe because it's hurting our ability to fight the war on terror.
But let's remember this. President Trump is doing exactly what candidate Trump promised for months. This morning, the president was staying on message.
It's not a Muslim ban, but we were totally prepared. It's working out very nicely. You see it at the airports. You see it all over. It's working out very nicely. And we're going to have a very strict ban, and we're going to have extreme vetting, which we should have had in this country for many years.
And late this afternoon, former President Obama released a statement saying he was heartened by the level of engagement taking place over this issue, saying the protests were appropriate whenever American values are at stake. Joining me are Jessica Vaughn, who is the Director of Policy Studies at the Center for Immigration Studies. Jessica, it's good to meet you. Thanks for being here. Cambridge City Councilor Nadeem Mazen, the first Muslim American to be elected to office in Massachusetts and one of the organizers of yesterday's rally. Nadeem, good to see you again. And Kate Crockford from the ACLU. Hey, Kate. Hey. Let me start with you, Jessica. You support what the president did. Why?
Well, since 9/11, there have been about 600 people who've been convicted of terror and terror-related offenses. 380 of them were non-citizens. They came as refugees. They came as lawful permanent residents. They came with non-immigrant visas. We've made too many mistakes in our vetting process. We have ISIS that's promising to infiltrate our immigration system, particularly the refugee flow. We've made mistakes. The San Bernardino attack is one example.
That nothing that he did on Friday would have stopped either of the people in San Bernardino, even though the Trump administration keeps referencing that.
No,
it
but
would have stopped neither of them.
What they're doing is pausing the programs so that we can implement a better screening program because we've made so many mistakes. Taking a pause, figuring out what we need to do better, how we can do better, because I think we really can do better.
Let me hold you there if I can. Kate, as I said a minute ago in the open, he's doing exactly what he promised to do when he was running.
That's right.
And I would argue that it's one of the reasons he was elected President of the United States was to do this. That's true, is it not? So why should he not follow through on a campaign promise?
It is true, and it's deeply troubling. President Trump, as you said, when he was campaigning, promised to initiate a Muslim ban. That's exactly what he's done. And the ACLU promised that we would sue him if he did that because it's unconstitutional. We did sue him in many states. And as you said before, here in Boston, we have a temporary restraining order against that executive order going into effect in Massachusetts.
I want to get back to the litigation in a minute, but Donald Trump, as you know, says it's not a Muslim ban. You disagree, and I'm sure you do too. Why?
He's called it a Muslim ban. Giuliani, who's kind of on his team and on his side, has called it a Muslim ban.
No, actually, that's not what Giuliani said. Originally, he was asked to do a Muslim ban, but then he revised the language so that it was a ban of dangerous individuals, not a Muslim ban. That's what former Mayor Giuliani said.
If you say so. My point...
That's what he said. I don't say so, but go ahead.
My point is that it's clearly a Muslim ban. It's clearly a religious test, and it's not just unconstitutional and poorly vetted for what it's worth, but it's also un-American. Seth Moulton had it right. Whenever we have had a ban like this in history, we have regretted it because it is turning away from our precept as a nation of immigrants. And for what it's worth, the examples that you brought for how we've done it poorly before are not examples of something that would be fixed by this ban. And frankly, I think the right has trouble bringing examples of why we should do this because in general, refugees and immigrants are highly law-abiding and incredible bolster our national economy and scientific and intellectual base incredibly.
Jessica, you want to respond?
I mean, of course, most of the people who are admitted, whether they're as refugees or legal immigrants or guest workers or what have you, are fine. That's not the problem. The problem is we have difficulty picking out the ones who are going to be a problem. And I can tell you, I'm a former consular officer. I've done this kind of vetting. I know how difficult it is, and especially how difficult it is with people coming from countries like Syria, Yemen, Somalia,
we have not
Iraq.
had a single terrorism-related homicide in 40 years from the 7 countries
but
that
there
were
have been
identified.
hundreds of people, well, from the countries that were identified, 60 of those 580 cases that I mentioned, the individuals came from Somalia or Yemen and other countries on that list. These are countries that were selected by the Obama administration
let's stop right
and
there.
Congress.
They were identified by the former President of the United States as, quote, countries of concern. And there's no question that Donald Trump has gone further than Barack Obama did, but Obama's the one that identified the countries, just as Jessica said.
I'm not saying that it's not right to scrutinize people coming into the country. I'm saying they're already scrutinized, and based on the system by which we scrutinize people, we have had no violence from these 7 countries due to terrorism in 40 years.
Sean Spicer spoke to obviously
CNN, not me, by the way.
Sean Spicer is obviously the press spokesperson for the president. Here's a little bit of what he had to say this afternoon briefing.
There were 325,000 people that came into this country over a 24-hour period from another country. 109 of them were stopped for additional screening. We've got to keep this in proportion.
Isn't it fair to say what he's saying is much ado about not much? I mean, ultimately they revised, and I think the facts are true. As one of you said, there wasn't much vetting in advance before he did this. They stepped back on the green card situation within 24 hours. I'm not saying there wasn't a problem up front. And it is, as Spicer says, a limited number of people. So if the Obama administration, if the Trump administration is willing to scale back some of the excesses of this, is it really worth this whole hullabaloo?
A couple things. First of all, this program has been referred to by many people on the right, including Steve Bannon, who's the closest presidential advisor and probably behind this executive order's former website, Breitbart News, as a refugee ban. It's not that. This is much more than just a refugee ban. It applies to legal permanent residents of the United States, green card holders. It applies to people who have visas to study here in Boston and elsewhere in the nation, to work in our high-tech companies. This applies to legal residents of the United States. The second thing I would say is that
But by the way, the history, if I just may for a second, I don't know of many cases where the Supreme Court has ruled that constitutional protections apply to foreign citizens, our Constitution, who are not U.S. permanent residents.
Yes, the
so this may not
Constitution-
be unconstitutional,
well,
even if you find it to be offensive, yes?
That's not true. The Constitution applies to all U.S. persons, which means any person physically in the United States or any U.S. citizen abroad. So actually, anyone who is here in the United States has the protections of the U.S. Constitution. But I just want to speak to the question about the 109 people.
Sure.
Because I actually find that to be one of the most disturbing things
Why?
that the Trump administration has said. Because when the government violates one person's civil rights and civil liberties, it is something that should offend all of us. And it is something that offends the Constitution. It is not acceptable to torture one person. It is not acceptable to illegally detain one person.
There's somebody who is disturbed as well. Chris Coons is a Democratic senator from Delaware. Let's hear what Coons had to say.
I see it as illegal, unconstitutional, and un-American. I don't think this ban will make us any safer. I frankly think it'll be a propaganda bonanza for ISIS. It has outraged a number of our close allies on whom we're relying to be our partners in the war on terror, and it has sent the wrong message to our allies around the world about what we stand for as a country.
You know, Jessica, you're a former Foreign Service officer at the State Department. Is there a word that the senator said that is untrue? Jihadis are putting out press releases saying this is a dream come true. It's as bad, at least they say, as the invasion of Iraq. They've had trouble recruiting people. This will help with recruitment. Some of our closest allies were railing against the United States this weekend. More than 1 million signatures, you know this, in the UK, urging Parliament not to allow Donald Trump to meet with the Queen, not let it be a state visit. Even if you think this is both constitutional and a good idea, is the damage that was done worth what you consider to be the positives?
I think it's preposterous for people to suggest that ISIS is suddenly going to stop wanting to attack us if we just would take more refugees.
No one said that. What they say is if we do this, the converse, it's going to help them in their recruitment, which for the most part has been down.
I just don't think it's the people who are saying that are the people who are want to see the refugee program expanded. I don't see any evidence for that.
Like John McCain and Lindsey Graham?
Right, exactly. They're going to oppose Donald Trump on most immigration things.
So did Bob Corker, who's almost picked for vice president by Donald Trump.
You know, again, I just think it's silly for us to say that if we just take more refugees, ISIS is going to love us, or that we're going to actually irritate them more than we already irritate them.
Nadeem, you helped. We only have 30 seconds. You helped organize the thing on Sunday. Most of those demonstrations were in states that Hillary Clinton won. So why should we believe that post-Sunday there's going to be this uprising against what Jessica thinks is a good idea? Most of these rallies on Sunday were not in red states. They were in blue states.
I hear you. Well, certainly there were places where there's a large population of people who care about American values and about our Constitution. I think the fact that the rallies were where the people are may overlap with democratic or progressive principles, but I also think there's a whole lot of people on the right, including McCain, who are standing up for what they know to be the strongest American values.
And last thing with you, I mean, what happens next? These are just temporary. Both
these
Brooklyn and New York, these are temporary. In 15
there are
seconds.
actually 5 nationwide. So
okay, what's the next step?
Here in Massachusetts, there will be a court hearing this week in this case.
Going to the underlying constitutionality.
Yeah, that will address the merits, yeah.
Great, Jessica, thank you. Good to see you. Appreciate it. Nadeem, counselor, excuse me. Thanks so much.
Thanks,
and Kate, good to see you too. Thanks so much for your time.